Athletic performance. This sequence uses a series of challenging breathing techniques and long breath holds to lower oxygen availability and increase oxygen demand, simulating high altitude training. These breath practices increase cardiorespiratory fitness, strengthen the respiratory muscles, improve VO2 max, expand vital capacity, and improve overall athletic performance. Movement and fitness played a massive role in my life from an early age. As a young child, I always wanted to be big and strong. Some of my earliest memories involved working out in my bedroom with a set of 3-pound concrete weights to a Hulkamania exercise poster. Perhaps it was those early memories that inspired me to get into collegiate and freestyle wrestling, or maybe it was the fact that I was small for my age, but also freakishly strong for my size, and wrestling is a sport that has weight classes, making it easier for smaller athletes to compete. I started wrestling at 12 years old and continued through high school. At 18, after joining the Marine Corps, I tried out and made it onto the All-Marine Wrestling team, which was an amazing opportunity to continue wrestling and compete at an elite level. During my time on the team, I competed throughout the United States and trained for the 2004 Olympics in Athens. Unfortunately, that dream was cut short in 2003 when I deployed to Iraq. A wrestling match lasts only 6 minutes, but it is probably the most physically demanding 6 minutes of any sport. During the 4 years I wrestled for the Marine Corps, my daily regimen consisted of 1 hour of running, 2 of weight training, and 3 of wrestling practice, which included cardio exercise. Most high-level wrestling matches come down to who has more stamina. While technique and strength are extremely important, you must outlast your opponent. I remember gasping for air, barely able to breathe enough to supply the amount of oxygen my body needed to meet the intense demand I put on it. I recall my muscles burning from high levels of carbon dioxide, my arms and legs nearly immobile, locked up with an opponent who was equally exhausted and struggling. Despite all of the training, I never trained how to breathe effectively and efficiently or improve my athletic stamina with breathing, even though winning or losing often comes down to cardiorespiratory endurance. Most athletes who push themselves to the limit are almost always breathing fast and heavy through an open mouth. This open mouth breathing is natural because our normal respiratory demand is nowhere near the demand we place on our bodies when we exercise. Even light jogging or walking up a few stairs can increase our need for oxygen to the point where we are huffing for air. The first time I was instructed to always breathe through my nose was when I started practicing yoga. I can't think of any other physical activity or sport where this is encouraged. However, many athletes now understand the amazing benefits of training with nasal breathing. With yoga, the breath takes precedence over physical movement. If we lose the breath, we stop holding the pose and return to calm nasal breathing and regain control over our breath before resuming the physical practice. Most people understand cardio fitness as having to do with the heart, so we train to get the heart rate up quickly, sustain it, and then recover to resting heart rate quickly. However, it's not just cardio fitness, but cardiorespiratory fitness, meaning it has to do with the heart and the breath. I wish I could go back and teach my younger self how to breathe to improve my athletic performance. Yoga is not as demanding as most sports, and maybe that's why it is so much easier to breathe through the nose during the practice. However, it is still challenging, and I have noticed that newer practitioners continually resort to mouth breathing as soon as their cardiac demand increases. Nasal breathing while exerting energy takes practice and conditioning. Nasal breathing alone will not increase athletic performance. However, training while nasal breathing will significantly improve athletic performance. Ideally, we want to increase the amount of oxygen we utilize and deliver throughout the body, also known as VO2 max. Increasing VO2 max improves endurance, stamina, and cardiovascular health. For the past several years, I have focused on training while nasal breathing, and whether I am doing yoga, high-intensity workouts, or training for handstands, I remain highly aware of how I breathe. When I practice long handstand holds, I hold water in my mouth to present myself from mouth breathing when things start to get challenging. We can increase our VO2 max, improve cardiorespiratory fitness, strengthen lungs, expand vital capacity, and improve athletic performance just by doing breathing exercises. When we aim to improve our fitness and performance with breathing, we want to focus on a few particular areas. One is lung capacity. Think of the lungs as the body's gas tank. Larger lungs have more room to hold air and exchange gases to fuel the body. It is debatable whether lung tissue can stretch. Most physiologists say that's not possible. However, it has been shown that lung capacity can be increased. This can be the result of expanding the chest, strengthening our ability to use the lungs, or possibly stretching the lungs themselves. For example, earlier I talked about the freediver Stig Severinsen, who increased his lung capacity to 14 liters. 9 liters more than the average adult. We also want to increase the strength of our respiratory muscles, especially the diaphragm. If the diaphragm fatigues, then our breathing becomes more labored and less efficient and requires more energy. This is the same with any untrained or unconditioned muscle. Using excess energy to breathe exhausts the skeletal muscles faster because less oxygen is available to them. Oxygen is delivered to the body via red blood cells. To increase oxygen delivery, which in turn improves performance and endurance, we need to increase the oxygen saturation of the red blood cells carried by the hemoglobin and increase the percentage of red blood cells in the blood, also known as hemocrodit. Our primary means of increasing hemocrodit is to boost oxygen demand while lowering oxygen availability. Most of what I talked about in regard to physical training while nasal breathing results in reduced oxygen availability. The body has to adapt by increasing the number of red blood cells, either by splenic contraction, where the spleen releases its store of red blood cells, a short-term solution, or by creating more red blood cells to meet the needs of the body. To achieve this with breathing, we need to decrease our blood oxygen saturation, which is the same as reducing oxygen availability. The most effective way to do it is through breath retention, specifically outer retention, or by a kumbhaka. The longer we hold the breath, the less oxygen is available and the greater the oxygen demand. To be able to hold the breath for an extended time, we need to increase our hemocrodit and our tolerance to high levels of carbon dioxide. We also want to increase our vital capacity, which enables us to hold more oxygen in our lungs. When we practice breath holding, the body senses the lower oxygen saturation and the kidneys release a hormone called erythropoietin, EPO, that stimulates the production of the red blood cells formed in the bone marrow. Outer retention, by a kumbhaka, is more efficient than inner retention, antara kumbhaka, because during outer retention, the decreased air volume means that less oxygen is available for uptake and carbon dioxide levels rise faster. However, when we combine outer and inner retention in succession, we can lengthen our efforts to increase oxygen demand and build carbon dioxide tolerance. Inner retention is more approachable for most people beginning to practice breath holds, and it can be a great way to slowly prepare the mind and body for the more challenging outer retentions. When building up carbon dioxide tolerance, you will experience a feeling of breath hunger. Breath hunger can be intense and uncomfortable, especially if you haven't felt it before. Often breath hunger causes involuntary contractions of the diaphragm, an intense sensation to breathe, and an increase in body temperature. In the beginning, holding the breath during breath hunger can be challenging. If you have ever fasted, you know the first day is usually when you experience the most intense hunger pain, which typically subsides or gets easier to handle as the fast progresses. Breath hunger is similar and gets much easier the more you practice. Of all the breath sequences I practice, the sequences that have to do with increasing athletic performance and long breath holds are my favorite, maybe because I enjoy challenges or because I see so much improvement when I practice them. If you want to increase your athletic endurance or lengthen your breath retention, then I suggest doing this sequence or one that you create that is similar at least once per week. If you're looking for greater results, you would do this sequence daily and modify it by increasing hold times when it starts to lose its challenge. The sequence is the most demanding and strenuous in this book. If the retentions are too long, feel free to shorten the duration of the holds. After a short time, you will be able to do these with relative ease. Warm up. The warm-up is called the lung expansion exercise and is different from any of the techniques or practices mentioned so far. The primary intent is to expand the lungs and stretch the respiratory muscles. This is similar to a breathing technique called lung packing. Many free divers, both novice and elite, practice lung packing to expand their vital capacity and increase oxygen reserves. They inhale as much air as they can before diving, completely filling the lungs and then packing in more air with small inhalations, sometimes up to 60 packs. Overpacking can be very dangerous, and I don't recommend to try lung packing without an experienced freediving coach to guide you. The lung expansion exercise is a gentler practice that involves taking a full inhale and holding it for 10 seconds to allow the chest and lungs to expand for a short time, similarly to holding a stretch before going deeper. While maintaining the inner retention, take another very small nasal inhalation and hold for 10 more seconds. Repeat this process once more for a total of 2 extra lung expansion inhalations in addition to the initial inhalation and 3 10-second inner retentions. After that third retention, exhale out of the mouth and empty the lungs. Each 10-second hold gives time for the lungs to expand, the air to settle, and the intercostal muscles to stretch. This succession of short inner retentions also gradually accustoms the body to rising carbon dioxide levels and builds up your carbon dioxide tolerance. The inhales and expansion breaths should not be painful. You might experience slight discomfort just like you would when stretching any other muscle. Repeat this exercise 10 times. Note: overdoing the lung expansion exercise or any other lung packing exercise by either inhaling to the point of pain or overpacking the lungs is potentially harmful and may result in pulmonary barotrauma. Heat building. The heat building component has 3 parts that work to strengthen the respiratory muscles and train breath retention. It starts with a 1-minute Bhastrika Pranayama. As you do this practice, put even more focus on moving your stomach in and out to strengthen your core muscles and diaphragm. As you perform the Bhastrika breath, you expel a large amount of carbon dioxide and become more alkaline. After 1 minute of bellows breath, exhale fully and hold the outer retention for 30 seconds, followed by a full inhale and a 1-minute inner retention. Because of the carbon dioxide deficiency created from the Bhastrika practice, both the inner and outer retentions should be relatively easy, especially compared to how challenging the retentions would be without doing this controlled hyperventilation first. The CO2 deficiency also provides more time in the breath hold to lower blood oxygen saturation, but less time to build up the carbon dioxide tolerance. However, the main objective of the heat building component is to strengthen the respiratory muscles. If the retentions are too challenging in the beginning, shorten them to a more manageable duration. After 1 minute of Antara Kumbhaka, take a complete exhalation and repeat the breath cycle 2 more times, starting with the Bhastrika breath. Vitalizing. The vitalizing component switches the focus of the breath retention and the increase of carbon dioxide tolerance to lower oxygen availability and increase oxygen demand. The breath holds in this component are 1/3 the length of the holds in the heat building component. However, because you are not initiating the retention with the Bhastrika, this practice can be slightly more challenging. It begins with 3 regular nasal breaths followed by a full exhalation and a 20-second outer retention. After the outer retention, take a single inhale and hold the breath for 40 more seconds. In this heat building component, you are continuously breathing off large amounts of CO2, which made the subsequent breath holds less challenging. The vitalizing practice gives you an insufficient number of respirations to regulate your carbon dioxide levels, so each retention becomes more difficult. Ideally, you want to experience a slight amount of breath hunger towards the end. If the holds are too short or too long, adjust them until the final round pushes you to the point where you feel some breath hunger but are not pushed to your breath holding limit. Repeat for 5 cycles. Cool down. The cool down pushes you to your breath holding edge. It begins with 10 full deep nasal inhalations in either an open mouth or a nasal exhalation. An open mouth can make it easier to breathe off more CO2. These breaths shouldn't feel like hyperventilating, even though they technically are. The deep, uninterrupted breaths enable you to breathe off a considerable amount of CO2 before beginning the breath hold. After 10 respirations, take a full deep breath and hold inner retention for as long as possible. You want to experience some breath hunger here. As you practice and get more accustomed to the sensation, you can remain in this phase for longer and feel more comfortable. Once you reach your limit of the first breath, exhale and repeat the process 2 more times, beginning again with 10 deep respirations. When you start practicing these retentions, aim for 2 minutes or a little longer. Over time, you'll be able to increase the duration to 4 minutes or longer. For some people, each subsequent retention is more difficult than the last. For me, my third hold is usually a minute or more longer than my first hold. This has to do with the splenic contraction releasing more red blood cells into circulation through the course of the sequence. The cool down is my favorite part of this practice because I can see my personal growth from training and effort. I suggest you do this sequence with a timer and keep track of your results. Also, be aware that the lengths of your breath retentions will fluctuate. Some days will be longer than others. Your performance will vary, but it will slowly increase over time, just not overnight. I find it helpful to keep track of other factors that affect my breath retention, such as sleep, diet, and stress, and determine what is affecting me the most so I can improve those areas of my life.